I made a game in 48 hours total. That includes sleeping, crying, running errands, eating, crying, etc. It was a struggle to fit everything in that I needed to, but I think it went alright. This is how it went. Welcome to my GMTK Jam devlog. I was a little late to start once the theme had been announced, although I did check on my phone. Joined together. That's interesting. Immediately I had some ideas. The obvious, which I ended up going with, was having two players join together with a tether of some sort. There were some other options, however, which I expanded upon once I began brainstorming. These included having two characters spiritually connected with an RPG, for example, or a puzzle game where two objects were connected in some way. I really liked the puzzle idea, but I had a hard time coming up for more mechanics, or ways to use the mechanic outside of just moving a block in two sections of the level or something. The RPG one was pretty innovative also, especially since it would be a central mechanic, but the constraints of the jam meant it wasn't the right idea to go for. My initial plan was to spend the Friday, so around from 7 PM to 11 PM, just brainstorming ideas, but I found that I need to get a base of concept thrown together first, and that would allow me to expand on the ideas that I've already got. Spent about an hour brainstorming first, and then I hopped straight into Game Maker Studio 2, and began setting out controls for a basic platformer. A lot of which was just taken, albeit modified slightly, from another project I've been meaning to actually acknowledge the existence of, instead of pretending it doesn't exist and starting a new project in the hopes that at least I'd finally create one that's actually finished one time, but... Sorry, where was I? Oh, the game. So, after around half an hour, I had two blocks jumping around with the ability to wall jump. I wanted to make sure I nailed platforming mechanics, since it was to be a platforming game, obviously. But it's essential to have a couple of things in platforming in order to feel well polished. That being variable jump height, friction or some amount of acceleration, and mid-air turning or some sort of control mid-air. Variable jump height is something that you may not notice from the get-go. Take Super Mario for example. If I press the button for say 5 frames, Mario will jump lower than if I press it for say 10 frames. This is one of the most integral things to include in a platformer, as it offers an immense amount of control to the player, allowing for an expanded amount of level design choices, as well as less frustration for the player, as they can easily make tighter and more difficult jumps. This usually allows for a good jump arc, i.e. a jump where you spend the majority of the time at the highest peak. I think this is where a lot of indie platformers can fail, or a lot of simplistic ones at least, since it's often overlooked, even in fairly well-known games such as Mutant Mudds. Friction isn't really essential for platformers, but I think it adds a whole lot, and once again is overlooked entirely in basic platformers. Going back to my favourite 2D platformer, Super Mario World. Okay, actually I think Celeste might be my favourite 2D platformer, but Mario World shows the friction mechanic better, so let's pretend it is. You can easily see Mario be affected by friction and slow down gradually, as well as vice versa, with him accelerating gradually. I say this isn't essential, which is true, and going without friction does make the controls tighter to a certain extent, but even so, I think adding fairly small amounts, such as in Celeste, does truly add to a gaming experience, since it offers something else the player has to think about while platforming. Plus, it makes implementing wall jumps a gajillion times easier, so we're going with it. Mid-air turning is something a lot of older platformers don't implement. For example, the original Super Mario Bros. And I don't know enough old platformers. Either way, it's apparent that this allows for more control, and therefore better level design, as we said before. Lovely stuff. Okay, I'll stop rambling about platform mechanics now, whatever. Originally, I wanted the tether in XÄKINO to act, well, like a tether, stopping the player from moving too far. This, however, to put it lightly, difficult to do. So I scrapped it, but my smooth brain created some hilarious results trying to get it work. Instead, I began to work on another mechanic that goes unused, but it was fairly simple to set up, and I'm glad it is. And I plan on continuing XÄKINO, at least right now I do, and using this mechanic in the near future. That being, different tether abilities. So in my initial brainstorms, I devised the idea to have the tether be able to perform different tasks, such as bouncing and moving objects, welding objects together, and of course killing enemies. The ability to switch between modes went unused, mainly because it's a jam game. It would have eaten up time trying to code and then create levels using each mechanic. However, The system is technically still implemented, and pressing 0 in the Jam build does change over the tether to a completely useless one. Hopefully I can get all the rest and more working in the future. The next day, I woke up and looked for some free assets on itch.io, and I found Warp City by Ansimus. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Anyways, they are fantastic. Holy wow, I wish I could pixel art this good. With this, I used the drone sprite from that pack and added that enemy in, using a sine wave to control the drift left and right of its target, that being the nearest player. In addition, it had to be activated by being in close proximity according to the x-axis. Once activated, it would follow the player until destroyed. This was important as otherwise, every enemy throughout the entire level would just travel to the players instantly, effectively just ruining any level design I just added. I added those in as well as parallax scrolling, which is a fancy way of saying when the background layers move at different speeds, which adds a hell of a lot of depth to the scene. And we're good to go. Well, the player sprite that came in the pack was too big in my opinion, so for now they're still squares, but we'll come back to that. I also found this really neat hologram effect for Game Maker by GM2 Games, or Gen2, I'm not quite sure. I played around with that, added it in, and used a large player sprite from the asset pack as a hologram. For some reason, at this point I was just really inspired to make some music, so I basically did some improvisation on my keyboard for a bit, then recorded those and quantized the note, which is basically fixing any timing errors, and kept recording more tracks. In addition, I made a drum loop through the grid editor, and repeated this for a bit, adding a new track via improvising, adjusting any timing or notes I accidentally hit, repeat. When it came to the... I don't really know what to call it, the climax, the chorus? When it came to this part of the song, I re-recorded it dozens of times, but all of the main melody was completely improvised on the spot. I think it came out really well actually, and it definitely matched the aesthetic of the art. To compensate for the tether not limited in the player's distance, I made it break instead, or lose connection if you will. In hindsight, this actually worked out great, since it didn't limit the level design too much. Sure, creativity is brought about from being limited, but not limited so much where it just becomes annoying. Afterwards, I added a text box so the hologram can speak, that acting as their tutorial and story character. I implemented the ability for multiple text boxes to be played one after the other, so there's long parts of dialogue relative to one box worth. Luckily, it all went relatively smoothly. Next, I decided to make the player sprite, or rather use the asset pack again, but resize the character into half that size and then recolor it. This took way too long, honestly, but I'm pretty happy with the result. There's not really much else to say. I needed a level, so I just basically threw one together. I didn't have any design ideologies or ideas or anything like that. I just effectively threw some platforms and enemies together, trying to think of a unique and creative way the two players could use the tether mechanic. I added some sounds from Kenny. Kenny's great, by the way. Please appreciate them. Actually, you know what? Scrap that. Appreciate anyone and everyone who releases free and paid for art and sounds. It's absolutely amazing to have this community to rely on, since I can't pixel art to save my life, sadly. And the sound effects are great to have pre-made. Anyway, added those in, and the game's just now got an extra dynamic to it. In order to make sure I had the necessary features, I reused the menu from my Legendary 46 game, as well as the transitions from that. By the way, you should totally check out that game. It's called Time is of the Essence, and my itch is in the description, winky face. At this point, it was nearing the end of the second day, about 27-28 hours into the jam. Before I went to bed, I wanted to think of a name for the game. Now this took way too long to do. I started with wanting it to name it like Blank City, with blank being tether in a different language, but it needed to sound high tech. I kept doing this for ages before trying a different approach. I took some futuristic sounding words, specifically Epsilon and Equinox, the latter of which I found on a synth pad on my keyboard after I jokingly said, I should look at the synth pad sounds, they both have stupidly futuristic names. So the joke's on me I suppose, because that did indeed work. I shoved an X at the start of both Epsilon and Equinox because I felt like it. Zepsilon didn't quite feel right, and Zequinox was close but a bit too hard to pronounce. I changed the EQU to a K to get Zekinox, which as you can probably tell became Zekino, and I was pretty happy with this. The E in Zekino, by the way, was what I thought was Epsilon until I looked it up after designing the logo, but I don't care because Kazai or Zai or however you say it looks cool, so it stays. Once the name was decided, I got out of bed the next day and overslept. It wasn't the end of the world, but it instantly scrapped some features, such as the aforementioned tether abilities, to instead focus on designing levels. But first, I made the logo, using the background from the asset pack, as well as the colour scheme of the drones as the O, just to give it some of its own character. I started work on making levels, but while doing so, I realised it needed checkpoints. I designed the sprite, which looks horrible, but adding the light from the hologram makes it look better, so it's an easy system to implement, only a minor setback, not much to do. I then play tested level 1 with my dad, changed anything that wasn't quite right, and it was time. I wanted to commit arson. In the game, obviously. This idea came from the name of a song I wrote about 3 or 4 months ago titled Fire in the City. The coincidence that the title fit perfectly was 2 of a reason to not 1. Include the song, and 2. Make a level where there was a massive wall of fire. So, I made a level with a massive wall of fire. I wanted the level to match the song perfectly, timing wise, but it was too long for that originally, so I shortened it and then ended up shortening it again while making the level. Mainly in order to better suit the short amount of time I had left, as well as the entire sequence as a whole. The full song, by the way, is on my music channel, link in the description. I would really appreciate it if you check it out. I think it's a banger. I don't say banger, no. I hate that, no. Pretend I didn't say anything. Designing this level took so fucking long. It killed me, honestly. I was so strained and so stressed at the little time I had left. But I couldn't just have 2 levels, one that didn't even use the main mechanic of the game. So I finangled my way into creating another drone-based level, which was even more draining. Seriously, I was so tired at the end of making these 2 levels, I just wanted to chuck my PC out the window. It's a normal feeling to have in a game jam, right? Actually, the fire level took so long, I ended up reusing buildings from that and just pasting them into the other level, simply because that was the only way I'd have enough time. It was horrid. A final playtest left me about 20 minutes to compile and upload everything. I managed to get there just before 7, although due to server issues it was extended until 7:20. And after uploading everything, I just did something else. I was so exhausted that I didn't even launch the compiled version. I didn't launch the compiled version. I didn't. Fuck's sake! The version I had submitted didn't work. I made an ending screen just before the final compile, but after my final tests, which, because of GameMaker's stupid room order system, made the menu go to that ending screen when you press play, even though that wasn't the order I saw, unless there was a little menu to change it. I hate that system. And the fact that it made my game just not work was crushing, especially as it was after the 30-minute grace period. Reluctantly, I removed my entry from Jam before anyone else tried to play it. So, if you pity me, go download the game below. Genuinely, I mean, you don't have to, it's a local multiplayer game, but I would really appreciate it. I still haven't tested it fully, so please, for the love of God, I hope there's no game-breaking bugs. It's a 2-player local multiplayer game, as I just said, but the itch page describes how to use GM Together to play online. This is the way I recommend playing online, rather than streaming using something like Parsec, although that does work, as there's near to no latency with GM Together. How to get it all set up is on the itch page and also on the GM Together itch page itself. Not sponsored, by the way, I just really like how it works. Overall, I think the jam went alright, I have to say. I wish there was more than 2 levels that showcased the main mechanic, and I wish I wasn't just an overconfident bastard and made sure it worked. I ended up spending like 20 or 21 hours on the game out of the total 48, mostly because I just had other things to do, you know, run errands and all that jazz. But I do like the mechanic, and I like the concepts, and I will probably continue XÄKINO into a full game. Maybe. Hopefully. Probably not, knowing me. There's a couple of things I've already changed in order to have the game be more accessible, which I did after the jam, so this probably wouldn't be in an updated version until much later in development. For example, player 2 is now coloured orange, as people with red-green colour blindness would have found it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to differentiate the 2 players, which is kind of necessary in a 2-player game. Additionally, I added the ability to blacken out the background in order to further make the game more accessible, and the contrast is much more prevalent when the background is darker. Anyways, that about wraps it all up. Thanks for watching my... I was going to say bread because it says pain. I'm not even bread. Oh god. Thanks for watching my pain and torture. Do all that YouTube stuff if you feel like it. The download is below, all that jazz. Au revoir.